it's always brought me to this intersection of feeling very scared because I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's probably true for a lot of my career. That's why I say it's very scary. But at the same time, I think it's also very rewarding to learn something new, to get good at it, and to see the impact that it can has. Lifelong learning is something that I think I'll always carry with me because I think it just produces a net good in the world for maybe yourself and then others.
Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland, and I'm a licensed pharmacist and third-year medical student. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist Company. As this podcast has grown, we have had the tremendous opportunity to broaden our scope and explore other non-traditional pharmacy careers. The PharmD opens so many doors, and by listening in, you, too, can learn from experts in the field on how to take the first steps. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Brian Fung. Dr. Fung is a licensed pharmacist with a passion for computer engineering. After completing pharmacy school, he underwent 2 years of pharmacy residency training with a PGY2 focus on pharmacy informatics. Since then, he has held a variety of positions, including a medication management informaticist at Mayo Clinic and clinical assistant professor at the University of Florida College of Pharmacy. He also has a strong interest in higher education and completed his master's Public Health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Medicine in 2020, and is currently in the process of obtaining a graduate certificate in biomedical informatics from Stanford University School of Medicine. Outside of his professional life, Brian has always had an entrepreneurial spirit and has inspired him to found the Pharmacy Informatics Academy and Brian K. Fung Media, LLC. Most recently, he created Decode 32 and serves as a health data architect at Verily. As a proud advocate for pharmacists and technology advancement, he has also grown a considerable following via social media platforms, including YouTube with over 1 million video views, and LinkedIn. Of note, in 2022, he was also selected as one of LinkedIn's top voices cohort. With all these tremendous achievements, Brian has remained humble and continues to align his passion for business, clinical informatics, infectious disease, and public health to optimize data and interoperability and promote the development of healthcare systems. Alrighty, welcome to the show, Dr. Fung. Happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nathan. Please do call me just Brian. Is perfectly fine.
Absolutely. So obviously that was a pretty lengthy introduction. I'm going to have to stop having such successful individuals on this podcast because these introductions are getting really long. I need like a glass of water in between. But sure, obviously you have a very strong knowledge base in a variety of concepts and industries. And so I'm really excited for today's episode. And I think we have a lot to explore and a lot of information I think the guests will benefit from. So, but with all that said, I think we have a lot to talk about. And let's kind of go back to the origin story of, why did you pursue a degree in pharmacy in the first place?
Yeah. So I never would have imagined I'd be in healthcare or even pharmacy at all. I think it goes, like, to be very specific, back to when my grandma was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So that was like sometime near the end of high school. And I was always like a computer engineer / programmer at the time. And I thought I'd go that route into college, but seeing my grandma, and I think like anyone that's in healthcare can typically relate when they see someone that has a sick family member, and having no other person really in my family that was in healthcare, it was like very difficult to watch because I'm very close with my grandma. And it was that primary impetus that really started me thinking about it. My grandpa actually also passed away my first year in college, and it was due to a medication error. So between those two things, at the end of my freshman year, it really propelled me to switch into healthcare, and it was pharmacy specifically.
So sorry to hear about that medication interaction. That's really unfortunate. So obviously you have a very strong rationale for exploring pharmacy, and so you were progressing through pharmacy school, and Did you always know that you wanted to go into something along like informatics, or did you ever play around? I remember from a previous interview in the past, we had talked about your interest in possibly going to medical school. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Mhm. Yes, brings back some interesting memories. I guess two parts on that. The first of which is I had no idea something like informatics even existed. I think I first learned of it in somewhere in the middle of rotations. So APPEs, and someone said, "Hey, Brian, there was I've considered going into this was a PGY1 resident at the time. He was like, I've considered going into informatics, but I ultimately pursued this route in oncology." And I was like, "Wait, what is informatics?" And he was like, "Oh, you don't know what informatics is? It's this role that kind of blends clinical and technical." And I was like, "Nope, this just piqued my interest." And given my background, I was super interested about it. So never knew I was going to pursue it. I wish I did know earlier, but I'm excited for that. And then the second one was about medical school. There's a lot that can be said there, and it's I feel like a lot of folks in pharmacy that have considered medical school have had similar feelings like this, where especially the way we were trained as pharmacists in pharmacy schools nowadays, it's very clinically oriented. And I think it just makes you think of different paths, maybe. And I think it's like a respect thing, or just like wanting more scope. It's probably a mixture of all these things, and it was just always an interest. I know one key thing that always came up. There was a group of us that always said, after we graduate pharmacy school, we're going to pursue medical school and practice as a pharmacist. It was a very interesting thought, but ultimately I never pursued it because I recognize that I can't really see blood. So I ended there.
Yeah, that's definitely a major barrier to getting through medical school. But so it was something that was on your radar that you were thinking about at one point in time. And I recall that you also sat for the MCAT. Is that correct?
Yeah,
so you were pretty
those are good
motivated.
times.
That's a monstrous test. So kudos to you for doing that and following through. Obviously, you kind of crossed medical school off the table at that point. You shifted your focus back to pharmacy residencies. You had this resident who was telling you should look into informatics. And so was that something that obviously motivated you to do your PGY1? And did you do a PGY1 with the focus of doing a PGY2, or were you just kind of walking into it and thinking, maybe I'll kind of explore my options later on?
That's a very interesting question. I have to really think back because it's been a long time.
Testing your memory.
Okay, yeah. So I think at the time when I was either the end of P4 or into my PGY1, I've always had the thought that I would pursue additional training, and I'm thinking beyond PGY2. So I think I've always wanted to do a PGY2 because I was fascinated with some type of specialization. A couple that come to mind is one, especially infectious diseases, trauma, critical care, were high on my list. And then I think, especially as I gravitated more and more towards infectious diseases, I'm pretty sure when I was a PGY1, I had considered a PGY1 and then a PGY2 in infectious diseases, and then going on to do a 2-year fellowship in infectious disease with Dr. Ryback. I'm sure most folks know who he is in the pharmacy world. He's the 2009 author of the Vanco guidelines. But I was in conversations with them all during my 4th year in pharmacy school, my 1st and 2nd years of residency, because it was a very high on my list to do that fellowship because I was just fascinated with infectious disease.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have obviously a strong interest in infectious disease. And what caused you to not go along with that pathway and to audible to informatics?
Oh, that's a fun question. I wonder who's going to be the audience of the podcast here, if it'll go into any of the infectious disease groups. So the story, I've said the story before to a couple of friends, and it was a couple of things. So my heart was always set on infectious disease. And the very first thing that came up was the ASHP Foundation's pharmacy forecast. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it's like a 4-year kind of like survey that kind of projects or predicts where the pharmacy profession would be headed for the next 4 years. So when I was graduating, that was 2013, and they released it for 2013 to 2017, like what's going to happen with the pharmacy profession. And two key things stood out. One was that there's going to be plenty of pharmacists who were trained in specialties like critical care or infectious disease or trauma, but there is going to be, and currently still is, a huge gap in pharmacists who are trained with an informatics background. And that made me think supply demand. I love infectious disease, but I think I only see like one at every hospital. So it's like, that might introduce some, supply demand issues for me. And then the second thing is like, maybe this informatics thing might be interesting to pursue. So the next story is Melissa Newhouser. I think I mentioned it to Michael Ryback about my interest in informatics, and he was like, "Hey, why don't you talk to Melissa Newhouser?" She was like someone who worked with me. She was at the time the national formulary coordinator for VAs for like all antibiotics, and she did a stint at the CDC. I was like, she'll probably be someone that's good to talk to, and she's super kind. Jumped on the phone with me. I was some random stranger, and she jumped on the phone with me at like 7 or 8 p.m. at night when I was a PGY1 resident, and she talked to me and was like, "What would you like?" And I was like, "I want to go to the CDC. I love public health. I love infectious disease. I want to do this fellowship with Ryback, but I also like informatics. Like, what's the best way of getting into infectious disease and maybe even going into the CDC, because I really love public health?" And she was like, well, I was like, from her perspective, she was saying that she was responsible for this big project that's still going on now. It's the antimicrobial usage and resistance module at the CDC. And what they aim to do is benchmark all antibiotics in the United States and track, how are we using antibiotics, and also the resistance patterns, because this is important. It's not just a local issue. It's like a national, if not global issue. She said the biggest struggle is we didn't know how to connect these hospitals to the CDC. It was always a struggle to aggregate this information. So she told me, if you want to do infectious disease, especially at the CDC or something like that, you should probably do informatics. And it was so fascinating. I was like, really? Like, Ryback told me to talk to her, I'm assuming to get me to go down the ID route, but I ventured into the informatics route because of that. And those key things were like very, very strongly influential into why I took the informatics path.
So it sounds like you had some pretty strong mentorship and some influence with that regard, as well as just a genuine curiosity to kind of explore this new niche specialty of pharmacy that has kind of grown out into what it is today, which I think is very fascinating. So you were pretty much at, the pioneer stage at that point in time, and it was you're kind of like treading on, new territory, which is very interesting. And so I'm curious, I guess I'm hoping that you'd be able to back up a few moments and just give the audience a brief overview of what even is clinical informatics and how was that particular specialty and role that I just mentioned progressed over time.
Yeah, a lot. We can talk for a long time about this topic. I'll be super short. I'll be super succinct here. I'll try my best. The first of which we'll start with the definition from AMIA, which is the American Medical Informatics Association. And so I think it was like in 2011 or 2015, sometime around there, had a white paper that was like, what is these informatics terms? And they start off with this big umbrella term called biomedical informatics. And they go through a lot of different things. You can search for the article. Basically, we have a very top level umbrella term up here called biomedical informatics. And there's like 5 different, kind of like types, or like not types, like subclasses of it. There's like imaging informatics, there's clinical informatics, there's population/public health informatics. There's one more that I don't remember, but the area that we're interested in for this context is it goes from biomedical informatics to clinical informatics to pharmacy informatics. That's kind of the hierarchy. And this is a carved out section of biomedical informatics because clinical informatics basically is like when it's like more like a one-on-one interaction. So like you as the physician, pharmacist, nurse, you're interacting with a patient or you're interacting with a EHR. It's kind of like a one-to-one kind of thing. And there's a lot of concepts around how do you help clinicians document better? How do you make sure the user interface is seamless? It makes sense. How can we reduce documentation burden? How can we display alerts and decision support to guide clinicians? That's a whole unique field versus like other areas like public health informatics. It's not really like a one-to-one. It's like immunization registries kind of thing. Or it's not like imaging informatics, which is purely focused on like radiology and how do we have it in a machine readable format? How do we easily exchange these images to different healthcare entities? So it's very different, but clinical informatics is really that focus, and it breaks down into like pharmacy informatics, nursing informatics, physician informatics, dental informatics. So that's like the big broad overview. Hopefully that wasn't too long of an answer.
No, that was actually very, very nice and succinct. I know you could probably talk about it for hours, so I appreciate that. And I think it really does shape the industry pretty well for any of the listeners who are interested in hearing about it. And so, based off of that description of what it is, what was your role in your PGY2 residency?
Most PGY2 residencies, or maybe I'll split this down in two parts. The first part is like when you look at the landscape of PGY2 pharmacy informatics residencies, especially the ones that are accredited by ASHP. In my mind, they were kind of split in two categories. One was like very focused on technical things, like how do you code in certain ways, like you're building, it could be anything. It could be like clinical decision support rules. It could be building web pages. It could be building an assortment of things, but you're very technically savvy, like working with these tools. And then the other one was like more leadership focused. You're leading large projects across the health system. Not that you aren't in the other one, but it's more like a strategic type of role, guiding how practice should be done, things like that. That's the two big categories. And I was more interested in this side. I wasn't as interested in getting too deep into the weeds. I was like figuring out how do we scale large projects that we want in the health system. So I did mine at the University of Utah, which they are one of the best organizations I've ever worked with for informatics. They have some of the best nursing informatics programs. My focus at the time, and it's always unique to what's going on in that organization. It's true of informatics, just depends on the project. And when I arrived, they had just converted to the Epic EHR, and they had Cerner previously, along with many other systems. So my experience was very much focused on the optimization of the Epic EHR. A lot of my projects were around that too. And if we go back to the big survey of all PGY2 pharmacy informatics residencies again, most of them have like these rotations in certain areas, regardless of whether or not it's leadership or more technical focus. And it's like order sets. Like, how do we design order sets in a way that's easy to use? What do we put in order sets? What kind of decision support do we do in there? Then there's another one that usually is like in automation. For example, how do we dispense medications in a hospital using like robotics or automate dispensing cabinets? Then there's another one might be like clinical decision support. How do we build alerts? What are the 5 rights? Like, how should they look? When should you fire alerts? That's another like, could be like 1 to 3 month rotation. And there's another one at Utah. We had 2 leadership rotations where it was like working with the C-suite groups to figure out what are the strategic directions we should do when it comes to implementing technology, because a lot of this kind of stuff is tied to reimbursements at the highest level. And then another one is like reporting and analytics. How do you write reports? How do you support operational needs when someone needs to find like all patients that have XYZ? Or what are our financials looking like for our drug expenditure? Like all these like different types of reports. And all of these are like very different types of skill sets to broadly introduce you to what pharmacy informatics is like in the health system. And then sometimes people go on to specialize in certain areas or do roles in different parts of it. So.
Wow. Yeah. So there's obviously a lot of different things that you can do with just having a single year of residency training, which I think is fascinating. And it's one of those things, like as like a practicing healthcare professional, I use an EHR every single day, and I just think it's really interesting to see like the granular aspect of all of these things that I'm seeing on my computer screen, and all of these order sets that pull up have been meticulously crafted by informatics specialists. And it's just something like I don't really think about on a day-to-day basis, but it's obviously done for a reason. And I think that the work that is being done in that particular industry has made healthcare so much better with regards to obviously like interoperability and things along those lines. There's obviously a lot for room to grow with that, and I'm sure we can talk about that in a few moments. But I think that's just like something that is just fascinating to explore. And
can I ask you a real quick question on that?
Sure.
Are you generally net, maybe this is like an obvious question, are you generally net positive or negative of EHRs?
So it depends. I think it depends on who you ask, especially because I have to be careful on what I say, but I'm currently a medical student. And so the medical students have the glorious job of doing plenty of documentation. And so there are a lot of challenges with some of the EHRs that I've worked with, especially, granted, I do it on my laptop, and we have like remote access. So it's a little bit, I guess, finickier, and it doesn't, connect as well. So that's one of the challenges. There's a lot of delays in clicking and orders and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of boxes to get through, a lot of things that need to be documented. And oops, you missed this, go back and do that. And it's just like, I feel like I'm running in a circle sometimes. So as a medical student, there are certainly some challenges. Maybe some attendings would argue that, oh, it's not so bad. But I think you have to ask the right people.
Gotcha. Okay. Fair enough.
Alrighty. So we obviously talked a lot about your background thus far, and like what kind of you've done in your training experience to become a informaticist at this point. So after you graduated residency, what were the next steps for you? What was the next thing you moved on to?
Yeah. At the time, after graduating, a very unique, many would say it's actually a once in a lifetime opportunity, opened up at my future employer, or past employer now, at the time, which was Mayo Clinic. And it was super interesting because Mayo Clinic had most of their EHRs on Cerner. And I remember when I was interviewing, I did a PPS interview at Personal Placement Service at ASHP mid-year, where you can interview with different programs and like hospitals for jobs. And Mayo Clinic was one of them. And I remember talking and interviewing with them, and they were like, we're probably going to go to Cerner. And I was like, well, I'm not interested in Cerner. I was a big Epic fanboy. And that's probably not a good thing. Like, I feel as though sometimes we choose organizations we work with because of how much we like an EHR. That's unfortunate, and it shouldn't be like that. But that was how I felt at the time. And I was like, well, Mayo's off the list. I'm not going there. And surprisingly, that opportunity opened up, and they reached out and were like, we're going to Epic. We would like to interview you on site. And every single person I know we talked to was like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to completely revolutionize and build from the ground up a EHR for Mayo. And I think maybe still to this day, at the time they noted it, the implementation for the EHR at Rochester, Minnesota, their main site, is still regarded as the single most complex Epic installation on both the Mayo and Epic side. So it was like a very unique opportunity to work for a great institution. And in the informatics world, we all hate go lives. Maybe that's just me, but we all hate go lives, but it is understood to be the best thing to have under your belt. The moment you have a go live, people know that you know a lot of different things because of how hectic of a go live is and how much you learn from it. So that came up, but maybe I should do a plug there. I think that I understood it to not be easy, and I admittedly think it was a very scary opportunity at the same time. And in the pharmacy informatics circles, this comes up every now and then. We talked about a dream team, and it's a very funny thing because in 2015, when I graduated with my PGY2 pharmacy informatics residency, there was like, I think 12 accredited PGY2s, and we all knew each other because it's a small world. Mayo hired all of us, and that was almost like set up intentionally, but not from Mayo, from us as residents, because we all talked. We said, where are you guys going? And all of us like, well, we might go here. We like this. Like, many of us had offers in our own institutions, but we had offers elsewhere as well. And we were like, if you go to Mayo, I'll go too. And we all said, well, we want at least a couple of us to go, because like we all trusted in each other's abilities. And we said, I'm not going alone. You guys all have to come. And ultimately, every single resident graduating that year was hired by Mayo. And they unofficially called us the dream team, because we basically, Mayo hired the PGY2 resident from all these different organizations coming from Ohio State University, or the Ohio State University, Oregon Health and Systems. There's Michigan. I was at Utah. Like, they hired all the residents to come, and we worked very well together to bring like a epic perspective from all the different other institutions. So that was the main thing. That was the main driver that came up afterwards. It's a very interesting time.
What a fun project to be on. You're working with all these individuals that you've kind of come close with over the years through your training, and then all of a sudden they're all hired and you're all working together on this massive project. So I can't think of a more fun experience, but also probably very stressful to obviously integrate all of this. But trial by fire, it sounds like, and you had some good support systems and some friends to work it through.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. And so additionally, on top of all of this, all these opportunities that you've had and how you've kind of built up this EHR, I know you also have like an entrepreneurial spirit. You have like this entrepreneurial bug, that interest in business, and you ended up creating like the Pharmacy Informatics Academy, as well as Brian K. Fung Media, LLC. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I think I'll start off with, I have no idea where this like entrepreneurial spirit came from. It's a very strange thing to think of. I think maybe it wasn't until the last year I'm becoming more acclimated to thinking of myself as an entrepreneur, or like interested in like starting companies and stuff like that. But Pharmacy Informatics Academy, I'll start with that. That was officially founded in December of 2019. And that was born out of a couple of things. One of those things for me and my three other co-founders, who's David Vu, Tony Dow, and Beishu Shah, is that we were frustrated in the fact that there wasn't more education around pharmacy informatics. No different than when I didn't find out about informatics when I was fourth year. There just was not information out there about pharmacy informatics. And I thought it was, being a user at the time of EHRs, I was frustrated with them. I was like, why are they so terrible? Like, why are they not designed better? I need to click like 4 times to do with one thing. And it was so frustrating. So I was like, this needs to be better. And so for a couple years after I graduated, from like 2015 to 2019, I was always like joining different organizations to say, we need to talk about this. We need to create materials. And no one did. And they didn't exist. Or I shouldn't say no one did. There's some that it just was not enough, in my opinion. And so we created it. We created what we hoped that we had as students. So that's how Pharmacy Informatics Academy started. And then my Brian K. Fung Media LLC was born from actually COVID. It probably started with like the creation of videos that I was doing to talk about pharmacy informatics. And then I was like, this is actually kind of fun. I wonder if I can get paid for it. And during COVID, I was like, why don't I just put together this company and see if people would hire me? Because at the time I was, I think 6 years into like doing camera type work, photography and videography. And it was nice to go out in nature and just have a hobby since it was during COVID. So that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with you. I think, like what you were saying with the Pharmacy Informatics Academy, is that, especially with pharmacy school in general, there's a lot of push and focus on doing just strictly community pharmacy or doing strictly residency, and specifically to the traditional clinical residency. And so I think your frustration with there's not a lot of people in this industry right now. We need more help with this industry, and I'm very passionate about this. I need to share. I think it's very similar to my experience, obviously, going through medical school. It's one of those avenues that they don't really advertise too much. And so that's kind of what I'm doing, obviously, with the physician pharmacist. And now it's reassuring to see that you've obviously made a lot of progress with it. I'm still in the early stages, so consider it some inspiration. But and then I think it's really interesting too that you created your own business off of your original interest and then kind of spun it into different ways to actually monetize it, which is really fascinating. And so my next question for you is, I think a lot of people also have interest in like creating their own business, specifically, pharmacists who are out there. And I find it ironic how, intelligent pharmacists are, but yet they're very averse to kind of taking that leap of faith. They're uncomfortable with the risks of the business world. What advice do you have for individuals who are interested in starting their own business?
I don't know if anyone's ever asked me that question. That's a very interesting one. I'll have to think about that. I guess like the first thing to mention is like I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think most of the pharmacists that I encounter, many of my colleagues and friends, are very risk averse. I don't know why. At the same time, I wish I remember the name of the podcast or book or whatever it was I read. It basically broke a lot of people down into also two categories in this case, where it's like most people who go for like these specialized roles, physician, pharmacist, lawyer, engineer, what have you, are typically the ones that take more or take less risk. They go into those professions because you come out of it and usually you have a pretty good job that's stable. And I think that just naturally attracts people who are more risk averse, maybe. That's just the assumption. That was whatever that goes with. And then people who are not conformant, not caring about, let's say, grades or like the structure of academics, are more inclined to explore curiosities and maybe even take that into like, hey, why is this problem not being solved? And they usually take the risk to say, I'm going to take a gap year, or I'm not going to pursue this professional path and do that. So I think there's probably a factor of influence from that part in terms of like, starting a business. And I know I kind of wandered off from that topic, but in terms of starting a business, I think this is going to be cliche advice. I do agree with it to some extent, which is do what you're doing to support your day job, which, as a pharmacist or physician, but use some of the money from that day job and some of the time to explore another hobby of yours. I think that's a good way to look for your passions or seek your purpose. And then ultimately, sometimes those things turn into a full-time job. But basically using the day job to fund your side job. And then sometimes those side jobs can really grow into something very unique. And then just like rinse and repeat. And that might be a good way to start a business because you find something that works, but you also have the safety net of your day job.
I love that. Definitely don't quit your day job until you've obviously proven that you can be profitable, but you also need to follow your passion. So I think that's something I always talk about, and it really resonates with me. Again, also very cliche.
Yeah.
But alrighty. So, well, speaking on business, I also want to ask you a few more questions. So I think a lot of individuals who are on the outside who haven't really, been in the realm of content creation, I guess you could say that consumers, they see like the tangible results of what you're doing every day, but I think very few of them recognize the hurdles that a creator has to overcome to finally be successful. And, I say this to obviously frame my next question. And I noticed on LinkedIn that you had recently posted that you had your first profitable year in business. Can you tell us about the significance of this achievement and kind of reflect on the challenges you faced up until this point?
Oh, you got some good questions. That's a very detailed. That's a very good question. Another one I have not actually thought of in detail. Let's see. So it's definitely an amazing feeling. I don't think that I ever would have even considered like this to be in the realm of reality. And I think maybe grit is a good term to use here, where I then and still do strongly believe that perpetuating pharmacy informatics to a lot of folks is through social media. And no matter how many followers or likes or whatever I get, I want to keep putting it into it. And I think having that mindset over the years, despite seeing very negative return, sometimes it's painful. Like to give an example about the effort, my videos, especially when I didn't know how to record videos or edit videos, usually took from 3 to 10 hours per video. And I would see them get like 30 views. It was very painful, but I think it was nicely supported with a positive feedback loop. I think maybe in the second year of content creation, I think I officially really started it in like the end of 2016 and especially 2017. I started to get a little bit of traction with feedback. Very surprisingly, people would like message me, and even like mentors would say, I see what you're doing online. Please keep doing it. And it was strangers, mentors, friends of friends. And I was like, I have, 200 subscribers. Like, what the heck? I don't have a lot of content out here, and it's just so strange. I think that having the day job that I had and feeling secure, I felt like I had the time and support to continue pursuing something I cared about. But the support from a lot of people, like truly, the positive reinforcement was pretty strong. And 2022 hitting that like really made me feel like, and this is why the whole startup of the business might be more compelling this year, is I feel as though I might have enough momentum here where this could actually be a thing, like something I can do and venture off on my own to really put all efforts, all my eggs in the basket, at least for some temporary amount of time, to see what this can turn into. A very long answer, I know.
Love that. And I definitely, I think you emphasize he's put 3 to 8 hours of content time into creating a video. And then, like you said, he gets 30 likes or 30 views and then 1 dislike. It says great content, but, the lighting was off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That kills you. And so I'm glad that you had that positive influence that finally started to give you that proof of concept. You started to gain some traction in that field. And obviously you continued because you loved doing what you do. So I think that's really important, and to not lose sight of that along the way. It sounds like you haven't. And it's just probably such a wonderful revelation to realize that there are people who are interested in what you're doing, and you found a way to monetize it and to also be happy and share like what you're passionate about. So just something that I hope everyone, finds something like that where they can kind of make money while also sustaining themselves and being happy with their job. Mm-hmm. And so I think another question with what comes to content creation is, I think one of the challenges that I personally noticed for myself is that, sometimes I struggle to turn off like my creative mind, especially when you're, making a business or you're trying to grow an online presence. You feel as though every second that you're not doing something on that particular sphere, or you're not, creating new content is an opportunity for someone else to kind of get in there, or you're kind of losing relevancy at that time. What have you done to kind of make sure that you take some safe space away from the business to kind of make sure that you're staying, relevant in your own kind of personal life and not falling short on responsibilities, but also maintaining that creative schedule? So sorry, that was kind of a all over the place question, but I guess to kind of summarize, what have you done to kind of take some space away from the content creation while also not losing sight of, your ultimate goal of growing this business?
Oh, that's I feel like I might even have like negative answer here, like not the best answer to share. But I first commend you for being able to create content during medical school. I think that is, that hats off to you. I can't even imagine doing that in pharmacy school. So I think in the context of your question, this is where the negative answer is, where it's like, don't follow what I do. And I think I share that sentiment where like the creative mind is never really off. And I always have some ideas and things I want to do and I want to keep creating. I think I've taken a lot of extra time away from other things that I shouldn't be to continue creating, where there was a lot of sacrifices that came from any type of relationships, like family and friends, lots of that. I've definitely taken a hit on my own personal mental health, whether it's like weight gain, health issues, eye issues. This is like a bad answer, but like I haven't been doing a super good job of turning things away. But what I will say is, man, I wish I remember who said this. There was someone else that said this recently, but Sam Altman, actually, OpenAI CEO. He said this, and I actually started doing this a year and a half ago. So whether it's for your day job or for content creation, there are some key things that you probably should do. And I am more rigid with this stuff than before. And one of those things is the minimum level of sleep you need. I've always felt like, why sleep? You can put in more work if you don't. So my sleep has never been the best, but I will make sure I get enough sleep because there's just so much support for like how it helps with productivity, makes you more creative, like all these like benefits. So I make sure I take care of my health first. The second thing is like related, where it's like mental and physical health, going to the gym, running, meditation, all these other things to kind of clear your mind. I think that's really important. And then the other thing, which maybe this is a better answer, Michelle Obama was a keynote for one of the ASHP mid-years. I can't remember which one, but there's one key thing that I really took away from her keynote speech, and that was she was asked a similar question, but it wasn't about content creation. It was about how do you make time for like relationships. And what she does is what I do now is she makes time because she schedules them in first. So I live off my calendar, and this is very easy for me. Whenever there's a friend's birthday, a friend's wedding, a parent's whatever, anything that comes with family and friends, I will schedule that in, and any work-related content creation will always go around it. That always comes first. And I think I try to do the same with like breaks for myself. I try to schedule in breaks, but I'm getting better at it. But I probably lean more towards the not great for your health kind of thing. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's like you said, like it can be very challenging to step away, especially when, as creators, you're very motivated and kind of getting to the end of your goal. You want to continue to advance the business that you're growing, and like you said, you found a structure to prioritize those social interactions and taking care of your health, which is very, very important for anyone in any kind of stressful situation, whether it's content creation or outside, just in the community or anything along those lines. So I'm glad that you found that. And so kind of transitioning a little bit back into, we talked a little bit about business and your background, and I want to explore right now, the tech industry. And so to kind of help tie things together, so your passion involves combining your pharmaceutical knowledge, big data interpretation, and computer logistics to develop better technology systems, which ultimately advances patient-centered care. So there's obviously no questions about your fervor for technology, but how do you encourage other healthcare professionals to get involved with tech? I feel like there's a very high barrier to entry, even for someone like myself who feels like I'm on my computer all the time. I feel like I know nothing about it.
Big problems usually aren't solved with just specialists in one particular area, in my mind. And the way I can kind of frame this in my more of a story, in the sense like working as a pharmacist, I was frustrated with EHR. So I said, let me work on the EHR side. I can at least work on that. Then working in informatics, the EHR side, I was like, then frustrated because we were always mandated to do this or that. We require clinicians to document this because why? It's not because we want to. It's because regulations. We need it for value-based care documentation. So I was like, I'm very frustrated. Let me go and venture over to the federal government. So I did a year internship at the HHS, specifically the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT, where a lot of these regulations came from that did things like meaningful use that got EHRs here for the first place. And I said, and I think I was very negative to a lot of folks there. Initially, I was like, you guys are not at the bedside. You guys are handing out all these rules, creating all this documentation burden. You guys are crazy. But then being there for a year, I began to realize it's not easy to do things because as a public servant, you're beholden to your stakeholders, which is, all citizens of the US. And it's not that there's only so much they can do, but like you have to be able to balance all perspectives. So it's basically more challenging than expected. And the last piece is like tech. I realized that government was also still bureaucratic and still slow and probably struggling. And then health systems were very slow. And last was tech being very innovative. So I became very interested in tech. And long story short, the reason why I was saying all that is because I hope clinicians who usually have, and I would hope have, a innate desire to help patients, want to help, people and benefit healthcare. You can't, not that you can't, that's not the right way to say it. It's like you can have a more meaningful impact when you involve another industry, be it the government, be it tech, be whatever. And so I really hope, and I try to encourage clinicians to join tech because I think it's a huge opportunity to reduce the cost of healthcare, to make healthcare better, and all these other things. So I know, long answer. That's my answer though.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And obviously big problems need, a lot of different solutions, and one piece might be able to take away, a minor part of that, but it doesn't always solve everything. And so kind of including all of those different perspectives, all those levels of expertise is how we can really accomplish a lot of great things. And so my next question is to kind of lead into it, but, what are some ways that you're actively, or I guess that you believe we can improve EHRs in the current market right now?
That's a big question. How to improve EHRs?
I know that's
so. I think there's a couple of things. I did my MPH capstone on how the 21st Century Cures Act can, the association of that with clinician burnout and the impact of EHRs and health information technology. One of the key studies I cited is a study that came out of the National Academy of Medicine in 2019. It was about burnout at the time, and like clinician burnout specifically. They identified many different variables that caused it. One, of course, EHRs. And they looked into different things on what caused that. And I really investigated into like, what are the key factors? The biggest one, and it's like undeniable, documentation burden. In the US, because of the different value-based systems that we have. Not that it's bad, it's just like the way it's probably been implemented. We have 4 times as much documentation than anywhere else in the world. And in general, we all know we have the most documentation, period. We can improve EHRs by reducing that. And there are so many different initiatives that are working towards that. And I'm keenly interested in how. And I think people who are clinicians who go into informatics have a huge role in figuring out how we can really optimize that. And then I'm not as interested in talking about the technologies to do so, because a tool is a tool. I'm more interested in the concepts. I think the concept here is just that documentation burden is a huge problem. And one of the best ways to fix it is fixing that.
I'm not sure if I'm using the term correctly, but it also introduces like the challenges of like interoperability as well and the communication between these different healthcare systems. I find that I'm always hunting for documentation from outside sources or for places where I have to call up the place and they have to send over a consent form. Then I have to sign the form, then fax it back over. And all of this is really delaying when I feel as if it would be so much more beneficial to have, immediate access to some of that information, because a lot of clinical judgment is really bogged down. A lot of time and resources falls short and it gets, used up in the system at that point in time. And I think it takes away, a lot of physicians and healthcare professionals get frustrated by that because we want to, improve the patient's experience, and it really slows down a lot of things. So do you have any comments on, the utility of like interoperability and the progress that could be made along those lines?
Yeah. So interoperability is one of those other factors that were identified. It wasn't like as salient as documentation burden. That was just like top of mind for every single person, or every single study rather. But interoperability was one of the key things that I identified. So did the National Academy of Medicine. There's a lot that can be said there, and many of which you just kind of mentioned. I think it's huge. There's maybe like, to be more abstract about it, I think interoperability really can address the 4 aims of healthcare, right? It can reduce costs, improve health. Don't remember one of the other ones, but also like burnout. And there's so many reasons why. So like, use a very basic example of like cost. There can be unnecessary ordering of tests. Like, did you get an X-ray? Did you get an ultrasound? Did you get this lab? I don't know, but you should. The right thing to do would probably be to reorder it so you can examine the patient correctly. You want to cover all your bases. So unnecessary tests, interoperability. If you have the test, they have it. That's one very basic example. Improving patients' health. You mentioned a couple examples there where like having access to patient information is key to making decisions. And I've seen both sides where like, if you didn't have information and you made a decision based on that omission, it caused patient harm, so that's the other one. And then of course the wellness and like mental health kind of thing, the 4th aim, where it's just, it's frustrating in so many different ways. Like, E and M codes are commonly cited. If you've documented the diagnosis for this patient in like 4 encounters ago, why do you need to document it again? That's one of the key things that the 21st Century Cures Act aimed to do, is like remove that redundant documentation. And I think all that kind of like, clinicians sitting at the bed, sitting in their desk and just like always hooked up to the EHRs. That's not good for mental wellness and that kind of stuff. So interoperability can fix, I don't remember that 4th one, but all of these issues, and I think it's super, super important to solving some of these problems.
Right. We're certainly not going to come up with a solution today, but I think the fact that we're talking about it is obviously going to raise awareness, and it's something that's very, very important for, like you said, burnout. A lot of physicians sit there and we're so connected to our computers all day, and we feel like we can't get away, and that we've lost some of that personal touch to medicine, which I think is what a lot of us went into medical school in the first place for. So getting back towards that and, limiting the documentation and the burden of doing so, I think would be greatly appreciated on the hands-on side of things, I suppose. Alrighty, so we're getting towards the end of our interview today, and I'm sure some users are probably curious about hearing your take on, ChatGTP. I know this is more of a fun topic to discuss, but I'm curious to know, how do you think it's going to influence healthcare as a whole?
That's a really hard question. and the reason why I say it's hard is because, to be honest, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of opportunities. And I also think whenever you introduce new technology into the world, there's unintended consequences. And I am fearful sometimes of what those unintended consequences are. But I'm more optimistic in general of what things can do. So, a couple of examples I'll say is I've seen a lot of uses where you can basically dictate, a lot of people dictate notes, a lot of providers dictate notes, and then someone transcribes it into the EHR. You can have AI or even ChatGPT take that dictation and structure it super nice into a SOAP note of some sort or HMP, something like that. So it's a really structured note. It's amazingly powerful. You can have it do, this might be a little bit much, but differential diagnosis. I've seen some pretty good examples of different physicians putting in a case report and having it spit out different differential diagnoses and why they think so. It's super amazing. I think my concern with its use in healthcare sometimes is when you just let it think. These cases I just described is less thinking because there's someone putting the input for it to think. There's other ones where it's how would you treat XYZ? And it's letting it open into the world where it learned on all these potentially incorrect information. That's scary. I don't think we should let it just go wild. If there's someone that's inserting it into ChatGPT, the output is much more maintained and constrained. And I think you can use it for things like documentation. So you can make a nice documentation. That's one example. The other one is going back to what we said earlier, where it's getting more clinicians interested in tech. I think that it's even if you were interested in tech, you might think that it's a huge barrier to entry. And to be honest, it probably is. It's like a foreign language, if you will, right? But ChatGPT, I've been experimenting with it the last few days, especially. I don't know how to write Python code. I've never really written any Python code. And I was able to use ChatGPT to write me a working prototype to retrieve information from CPIC, which is an organization that's dedicated to implementing pharmacogenetics, and basically say, hey, if my patient has this drug and this gene phenotype, what should I do? In the past, we have to go pull up the guidelines. That stuff is not computable. Or if you're in the EHR world, you have to read the guidelines and program that into there. With ChatGPT in 2-3 hours, I was able to build something that I've never built before. And that's powerful because I get to inject a clinical lens into how I want this to work. So these are two use cases. There's so many more, but I don't want to belabor the point. But there's a lot of opportunity. I do also think that we should be wary and skeptical of some of the unintended consequences too. And I'm on the lookout for that. There's plenty of cases for that too. But I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. You had me nervous there for a second. You started talking about differential diagnoses. I was like, oh no, I'm in medical school. That's probably bad. But it sounds like we're years off from that.
Not a hesitant laugh.
Alrighty, so I know we're getting into the interview here, but I just have a few finishing questions here to kind of wrap up on your experience. And so I want to ask you, what does it mean to be a lifelong learner, and how has this personal drive made you who you are today?
Hmm. And you really got good questions today. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that either. Um, I so I think to your first question, what does it mean to be a lifelong learner? I think it just means like being curious all the time. And I think like that's some people are, or actually no, maybe I think everyone is curious. You know, you think back to when we were all kids, you just have a innate curiosity. And I think it's just whether or not you want to keep that around. Everyone has it. It's just do you want to activate it? But it's just always interesting to me. Maybe it's because I get bored of things easily. I'm just always interested, like, what if or whatever. So I think lifelong learning is always about that. It's just like thinking the what ifs or just like exploring things that you're interested in. I think it's been very scary in terms of how it's applied to my professional life. And it's scary because I tend to find myself at the intersection of weird and uncomfortable places. Give an example. When I finally finished my PGY2 in pharmacy informatics and I got my first job at Mayo, my role actually wasn't in pharmacy informatics. I was actually a reporting lead on the infection control team. I have no idea about infection control. I was responsible for figuring out how do we abstract information to report hospital-acquired infections to the NHSN, which is the CDC's reporting arm. I've never done that. It's not necessarily clinical in that regard. How you practice, it was very different. And so my interest in that it grew, and I actually ended up doing MPH for it because I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And MPHs are usually the subject matter experts for people who do that. So I was like, oh, cool, explore that. Then I, started venturing off into these different areas in the federal government or in tech and all these things. And it's always brought me to this intersection of feeling very scared because I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's probably true for a lot of my career. That's why I say it's very scary. But at the same time, I think it's also very rewarding to learn something new, to get good at it, and to see the impact that it can has. Lifelong learning is something that I think I'll always carry with me because I think it just produces a net good in the world for maybe yourself and then others. So,
absolutely. You always have to keep learning and staying curious because that's obviously just super important to kind of staying relevant, obviously, professionally speaking, but also just from an internal locus, having something that you're passionate about, that you're exploring, and kind of always looking for the next great thing. Additionally, just to summarize the final points here, what are your personal, professional, or business-oriented goals that you would like to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
I have one that I can share to be super brief, and it's like not even fleshed out, but I've very vaguely mentioned it before. And the one I would like to say, because I've given my timeline of about 5 years, I would like to start my own thing, like truly step away from everything and start my own business, a business that is dedicated to educating the future biomedical informaticians that want to solve problems at the intersection of healthcare and technology. I think that there's still and probably will continue to have like this gap in that area. And I think that's a problem that we need to solve. And that's a problem that I'm very interested in solving. So sometime in the next 5 years, I want to at least try to see what that looks like. So keep it simple and short.
Excellent. You're going to give it a shot. You're going to go for it. And all the students listening in, don't go to medical school, become an informaticist.
What would you say that? We need physicians. We need a lot of physicians. Over here.
Of course. So we've come to the end of our interview today, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey or other non-traditional careers after pharmacy school, check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. Before we let you go, Brian, how can our listeners get in touch with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, the The two best places is probably one on LinkedIn. And then the second one is just my website. So briankfung.com. There's ways to contact me, and then there's a lot of other useful resources there you can find, including a great FAQ that can probably answer your questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Brian. I really do appreciate your time. I know you're an extremely busy individual, and so this means a lot.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Nathan. This was fantastic, and it's always fun to talk about yourself. And I appreciate the thought that you've put into the questions. So thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. All right, take care.